Snow was falling softly over a small Vermont town when an old couple walked into a market with 2 trembling puppies. They were not asking for money, not at first, only trying to buy 1 bag of dog food they could not afford. A retired Navy SEAL stood nearby with his aging German Shepherd, watching a kind of heartbreak no battle had prepared him for. The couple offered him the puppies not because they didn't love them, but because love had become heavier than their empty pockets. He bought the food, drove them home, and found something colder than the storm waiting at their door. A few missing dollars would lead to a house nearly lost, a town forced to look closer, and 3 dogs who knew where broken hearts belonged. If this story touches you, tell us where you're watching from. And please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep writing more stories like this. White Pine Falls, Vermont, looked almost too beautiful that morning to be cruel. Snow fell lightly over the small mountain town, not in a storm yet, but in silver threads that drifted from a pale sky and caught on rooftops, pine branches, windshield wipers, and the shoulders of anyone slow enough to be chosen by winter. The frozen lake beyond the main road held the weak sunlight like old glass. Farther up the ridge, the dark pines stood still and solemn, as if they had gathered to witness something no one else had been warned about. The people of White Pine Falls knew that kind of mourning. It was the pretty face winter wore before it closed its fist. By 7:30, the sign outside North Lantern Market had already begun to flicker in the cold. The convenience store sat where the mountain road bent toward the forest, half gas station, half last chance shelter. Inside, the heater rattled above the door, coffee burned in 2 glass pots, and a rack of emergency supplies had been pushed closer to the front. Batteries, canned soup, flashlights, road salt, hand warmers, and cheap candles that smelled faintly of vanilla even before being lit. Caleb Mercer entered with Snow on his boots and an old German Shepherd at his left side. He did not make an entrance in the way loud men did. No heavy glance around the room, no need to measure who noticed him. Caleb simply stepped in, paused long enough for Bishop to clear the mat, and moved toward the supply aisle with the quiet precision of a man who had spent much of his life learning that wasted motion could become costly. He was 52, tall, broad through the shoulders, built more like weathered timber than polished stone. His olive-drab combat shirt fit close through the torso, the camouflage sleeves creased at the elbows, dark horizontal bands crossing the upper arms. It was not worn like a costume. It looked like something pulled from a past that still knew his shape. Over it, he wore a faded pine-green winter jacket, unzipped despite the cold. Charcoal tactical pants disappeared into old brown snow boots crusted white at the seams from road salt. His beard was short, brown with silver threaded through it, and his hair, clipped practical and close, had gone gray at the temples. A slight bend in his nose gave his face an unfinished honesty, as if life had tried once to redraw him and given up halfway. Bishop moved slower than Caleb remembered him moving years ago. That was the thought Caleb had every morning and hated himself for having. The German Shepherd was 9 now, large and black and tan, his muzzle brushed with gray, his chest still proud, though his hips rose with care. His left ear stood sharp, the right had a small tear along the edge. Around his neck was a dark brown leather collar, old and softened by years of rain, sweat, and duty. The small metal tag read, Bishop. On the back were 2 words Caleb never looked at for long. Stay close. Bishop did, even now. Caleb picked up batteries first, then canned stew, then a pack of hand warmers, 2 lighters, a bundle of candles, and the joint medicine Sam Whitaker had recommended for Bishop's bad hip. He added coffee without looking at the price because coffee, unlike hope, remained a necessary substance. He had nearly turned toward the register when he heard the soft metallic rattle of coins being counted too carefully. There were sounds a man could ignore. That was not one of them. At the counter stood an elderly couple with a small pile of items between them and Darla Finch, the cashier. Darla was in her blue North Lantern polo, black thermal sleeves underneath, her reddish-brown hair tied back in a tired ponytail. A ring of keys hung at her hip and clinked whenever she shifted her weight. She had the face of someone who had apologized to too many people before breakfast. The old man beside the counter was trying to make money appear by force of will. He had a worn canvas coat, a navy knit cap pulled low, and work hands so cracked by cold they looked carved rather than born. He kept turning over pennies, nickels, 2 quarters, then smoothing the bills flat, as if wrinkles had hidden value inside them. His shoulders were still broad, though age had bent him at the spine. His silver mustache twitched once, hard, like a door trying not to shake in wind. The woman beside him held 2 puppies against her chest. That was what stopped Caleb fully. They were German Shepherd mixes, maybe 12 weeks old, bundled inside a faded wool blanket. One had a bright little face and one ear half-flopped in comic defiance. The other was darker, smaller, with watchful amber-brown eyes and a black mark down its muzzle that made it look solemn beyond its age. The woman held them carefully, as if warmth itself were a debt she could not afford to miss a payment on. She was small, wrapped in an old beige cardigan beneath her winter coat. Her hair, silver blonde and pinned low at the back of her neck, had loosened in soft strands around her face. She kept one hand over the puppies and the other resting near a box of cold medicine on the counter. Darla looked at the register screen, then at the money, then at the old woman. "Martha," she said softly, "I'm sorry." The old man's jaw tightened. The woman gave a tiny nod, the kind people gave when they were trying to spare someone else the shame of their own disappointment. "I know," she whispered. "It's all right." But it was not all right. The items on the counter told their own small, merciless story. 1 cheap bag of puppy food, 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and cold medicine. Survival had been arranged there in a line, and even survival had come up short. Darla lowered her voice. "If it was just me, I'd—" "Rules are rules," the old man cut in. He did not say it cruelly. He said it before Darla could finish pitying him. Caleb knew that reflex. Pride often stepped in front of pain like an old guard dog, toothless but still willing to bite. The old man gathered the coins back into his palm. "Take off the dog food." Martha's arms tightened around the blanket. 1 puppy stirred. The brighter one blinked at the fluorescent lights, then pushed its nose against Martha's sweater. The darker puppy remained still, watching the old man with a quiet uncertainty that did not belong on a creature so young. Darla hesitated. "Walter?" "Take it off," he said again. Martha did not argue. That was worse than arguing. Her eyes lowered to the puppies, and for one moment the whole store seemed to shrink around her. Caleb stood at the end of the aisle with a pack of batteries in his hand and felt something old shift in him, something he had spent years training into silence. He had seen hunger before. He had seen fear. He had seen men bleed and laugh because laughing gave fear less room to sit. But this was different. This was 2 old people trying to choose who got to be warm. Bishop moved before Caleb did. The old shepherd took 3 slow steps forward, stopped near the end of the counter, and lowered his head slightly. Not submissive, not threatening, simply present. The darker puppy saw him first. Its ears twitched, its eyes widened. Martha looked down, then followed the puppy's gaze. Walter turned too. For a moment, no one spoke. Bishop stood like an old soldier before 2 recruits who had been delivered to the wrong war. Walter's eyes moved from the dog to Caleb. There was calculation in the old man's face and dread beneath it. He looked at Caleb's shirt, the camo sleeves, the boots, the stillness. Then he looked back at Bishop, whose gray muzzle and calm eyes seemed to answer a question Walter had not dared to ask aloud. The old man swallowed. "You handle dogs?" Walter asked. Caleb set the batteries on a nearby shelf. "Some." It was the kind of answer that said both nothing and enough. Martha looked at her husband quickly. Walter, no. But Walter had already stepped into a decision, and pride, once moving, often preferred a cliff to retreat. He faced Caleb directly. We're not asking for money. I didn't say you were. Walter's mouth tightened. These pups need food, heat, someone who knows what they're doing. His voice grew rougher, not louder. We found them near the North Trail 3 nights ago, in a box, soaked through, called the shelter. They said they were full and the roads were turning bad. Told us if we could bring them over to Montpellier, maybe they'd look. Martha's eyes shone. They were so cold. The brighter puppy sneezed, as if embarrassed by tragedy being discussed in public. Darla looked away, blinking hard. Walter went on, each word dragged over stone. We kept them through the cold snap, figured maybe just one night, then another. He glanced at the dog food on the counter, then at the coins in his hand. Now the storm's coming. Caleb said nothing. Martha looked down and kissed the darker puppy between the ears. This one's Juniper, she whispered, almost to herself. And this little thief is Pip. Pip chose that moment to chew the edge of the blanket with the optimism of a creature convinced fabric was temporary. Walter's face flickered. It was nearly a smile, and then it was gone. If you can take them, he said to Caleb, we'd rather hand them to a man with a dog like that than leave them to chance. The words landed harder than a request for help would have. Caleb looked at the puppies, then at Martha's hands, holding them as if her own ribs had been wrapped in wool. Then at Walter, who had offered away something he clearly wanted to keep because he could not bear to watch it suffer. Caleb had been offered many things in his life. Orders, weapons, medals, apologies too late to matter. He had never been offered 2 puppies by a man trying not to break in a gas station. No, Caleb said quietly. Martha flinched. Walter's face closed. Caleb stepped toward the counter, took the cheap bag of dog food, and set it aside. Then he walked to the pet aisle and came back with the largest bag they carried. He added puppy formula, a pack of soft food, 2 cans of chicken, milk, eggs, extra soup, batteries, and a box of tea with a picture of lemon on the front, because Martha's hands had trembled toward it once before she looked away. Darla watched him scan the pile with his eyes. Ring it all up, Caleb said. Walter's shame turned fast into anger. Now hold on. Caleb did not look at him yet. I am. We don't take charity. Good, Caleb said. Then call it weather preparedness. Walter stared at him. Darla made a sound dangerously close to a laugh, then covered it by clearing her throat. Caleb finally turned. Storm's coming. Roads get bad. Dogs eat. People eat. That's not charity. That's logistics. Walter's eyes narrowed. You always talk like that? Only before coffee. Pip sneezed again. For one strange second, Martha laughed. It was a small laugh, thin from worry, but real enough to warm the air around it. Caleb saw Walter hear it, saw the old man's anger falter at the sound. The register beeped item after item. Outside, the sky had lowered. Snow was falling harder now, the silver threads thickening into white curtains beyond the glass. A pickup sat near Pump 3, old and blue-gray, its hood dusted in snow. Caleb noticed it because the driver's side door had not shut fully. Then the engine coughed. Once. Twice. A weak grind came through the store window. Darla turned her head. Walter, is that your truck? Walter did not answer. The pickup coughed again, spat a little pale smoke, then went still. The silence afterward was complete. Martha closed her eyes. Walter's hand curled around the coins until his knuckles paled. A man could survive many insults, Caleb knew. A dead engine in front of witnesses was sometimes worse than a punch. Darla moved toward the window. Oh, Walter. Battery's old, Walter muttered. It'll catch. but the snow kept coming. Bishop walked past Caleb and lay down beside Martha's boots, his old body lowering slowly, carefully. He placed his head on his paws, facing the door, guarding without drama. Juniper stared at him from the blanket. After a few seconds, the puppy stopped trembling. Caleb looked at Walter. "How far?" "None of your business." "Far enough to freeze in a dead truck?" Walter's mouth opened, then closed. Martha answered softly. "Pine Hollow lots. Past the creek road." Darla made a worried face. "That road drifts early." "I know," Caleb said. He paid before Walter could object again. Darla bagged the groceries quickly, adding an extra roll of paper towels when no one was looking and pretending she had not done it. Walter saw anyway. He said nothing. That was his thank you. Caleb lifted 2 bags in one hand and the dog food in the other. "I'll drive you." Walter let out a bitter little breath. "You collect strays often?" Caleb glanced at Pip gnawing the blanket, Juniper hiding under Martha's chin, and Bishop watching the door like fate had sent him a boring but necessary assignment. "Not often," Caleb said. "Only when they're blocking the road." Martha smiled despite herself. Walter looked ready to be offended, but too tired to finish the job. Outside, the wind pushed snow sideways across the parking lot. The mountains had vanished behind a moving wall of white. Caleb opened the door, and cold rushed in with the sharp authority of a kingdom reclaiming its land. For a moment, Walter stood on the threshold with his dead truck ahead, his wife beside him, 2 puppies in her arms, and a stranger carrying the food he had not been able to buy. His pride was still there. But so was the storm, and some battles, Caleb knew, were lost by men who mistook help for surrender. Bishop rose slowly, hips stiff, then stepped out first into the snow. He paused beside Martha, waited until she followed, and walked close enough that the old woman could steady herself with one hand on his back if she needed to. Walter saw that too. This time, when Caleb nodded toward his truck, the old man did not refuse. He only pulled his coat tighter, looked once at the white sky, and muttered, "Fine, but I'm not thanking you for kidnapping us." Caleb opened the passenger door. "I wouldn't dream of it." Behind them, Darla stood inside the glowing market window, one hand pressed lightly to the glass, watching as the old shepherd led the little procession through the snow. Not a rescue, not yet. Just 4 people, 3 dogs, and a bag of food that had cost a few dollars more than 2 old hands could find. Sometimes winter tested a town with blizzards. Sometimes it began with a receipt. The drive to Pine Hollow lots took 12 minutes in clear weather. That morning it took nearly half an hour. Caleb kept the truck slow, letting the tires find their way through the fresh snow instead of forcing them. The mountain road climbed past closed mailboxes, frozen drainage ditches, and black pines bowed beneath the first real weight of winter. Every few yards, wind scraped loose powder across the pavement, erasing the yellow line as if the road itself had begun to forget where it belonged. Walter sat in the back seat because Martha needed the front, though he made it clear by his posture that he considered this arrangement an insult to both age and manhood. Martha held the 2 puppies on her lap, wrapped together in the old wool blanket. Pip had fallen asleep with his mouth open against her sleeve, surrendering to warmth with the shameless faith of the very young. Juniper did not sleep. She kept her nose tucked near Martha's wrist, her dark eyes moving from Caleb's hands on the wheel to Bishop's broad head in the rear cargo space. Bishop lay behind them on an old blanket Caleb kept there for him. His body swayed gently with the turns, but his eyes stayed on the puppies. Not eager, not suspicious. Patient, Walter noticed. "Dog always stare like a tax collector?" he muttered. Caleb did not take his eyes off the road. Only when someone owes him. Martha made a small sound, almost a laugh. Walter grunted, which might have been disapproval or might have been the closest his pride allowed him to come to amusement. White Pine Falls thinned behind them. Storefronts gave way to a church steeple, then to a road sign half buried in snow, then to woods. The world became quieter. Not peaceful exactly, more like a room where everyone had lowered their voice because someone was ill. They turned off the main road onto Creek Hollow Lane. The pavement gave up after a quarter mile and became packed gravel beneath snow. Caleb saw old tire ruts, a leaning mailbox, a broken fence rail, and several manufactured homes set apart under the trees. Some had porch lights glowing warmly. Some had tarps over windows. One had a plastic Santa lying face down in a snowbank, still smiling with unnecessary courage. "Last one," Martha said softly. Caleb followed the road until it ended near the edge of the pines. The Baines home sat there with its narrow porch facing the woods, a manufactured home from another decade, faded cream siding patched in places with mismatched panels. Snow had gathered along the skirting beneath it. The roof sagged slightly near one corner, and a line of old Christmas lights hung from the eaves. Half of them glowed. Half had surrendered. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from a metal chimney pipe. The place was not dead. That was the first thing Caleb thought. Poor, yes. Tired, yes. Standing under winter like an old mule under a heavy pack. But not dead. Walter opened the truck door before Caleb could get out to help him. His boots hit the snow with a hard crunch. He straightened slowly, hiding the pain in his knees the way some men hid contraband. "Road gets worse after noon," Walter said. "You should turn back before the county forgets this end exists." "County ever remember it?" Caleb asked. Walter looked at him, then snorted once. "Fair?" Martha waited while Caleb came around and opened her door. She seemed embarrassed by the courtesy, as though kindness were something expensive that might appear on a bill later. Bishop stepped down from the back with care, his bad hip stiff from the ride. Snow dusted his gray muzzle. Pip woke immediately and tried to climb out of the blanket toward him. "Pip," Martha whispered, "you have the survival instincts of a biscuit." The puppy ignored this criticism. Caleb carried the groceries to the porch. Walter tried to take the dog food from him and failed to do it subtly. "I've got it," Caleb said. "It's my porch. It's my spine." Walter stared at him. Martha, already moving toward the door, murmured, "Frankly, Walter, his spine does look newer." Walter looked wounded by betrayal. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I am. That's why I'm preserving your back for future complaining." For the first time, Caleb saw the shape of their marriage clearly. Not soft words and grand gestures, but two people who had survived by turning worry into weathered jokes, passing them back and forth like matches in the cold. Inside, the manufactured home smelled faintly of wood smoke, old fabric, dog milk, and lemon soap. The air was cool, but not freezing. A small heater hummed near the kitchen, working hard and losing the war by inches. The place was narrow, low-ceilinged, and deeply lived in. It was also clean. That mattered. Caleb noticed the details before he meant to. A kitchen counter scrubbed pale from years of use. Canned goods lined in strict rows. A cracked mug holding pens. A dish towel folded over the oven handle with military precision, though Walter had never been military. Near the window stood a small sewing table with a lamp, spools of thread, a tin box decorated with faded daisies, and pieces of cloth cut into careful strips. On the wall beside the back door, tools hung from nails in exact order: pliers, wrench, hammer, screwdriver, handsaw. Beneath them sat glass jars of screws, washers, hinges, and odd bits of metal, each labeled in blunt handwriting. Walter Baines, Caleb understood, was a man who had spent his life believing anything broken deserved at least one last attempt. Martha set the puppies into a shallow cardboard box lined with towels beside the heater. Pip immediately tried to climb out. Juniper tucked herself into the far corner, nose low, eyes large. Bishop stood just inside the doorway. He did not approach the box. Instead, he lowered himself slowly onto the floor several feet away, close enough to be seen, far enough not to claim space that was not his. His old bones made the descent look ceremonial. Juniper watched him. Pip, having failed to escape the box, began chewing the towel. "That one's a fool," Walter said. "He's optimistic," Martha corrected. "That's what I said." Caleb placed the groceries on the counter. He had been in houses after raids, houses after floods, houses after men left too quickly and took only what they could carry. This was different. Nothing here had been abandoned. Everything had been held onto too long because letting go cost money, memory, or both. Martha began putting away the food with a quiet urgency. Not greed, relief. She touched the bag of puppy food once before lifting it, her fingers resting on the printed picture of a healthy dog as if it were a promise. "You didn't have to buy the large one," she said. "No," Caleb answered. "But the small one was insulting." Walter turned from the tool wall. "Dog food can't insult you." "Not with that attitude." Martha smiled down into the cabinet. Walter shook his head, but the edge of his mouth moved. Barely. Caleb watched him take the cans of soup and place them in the pantry, not randomly, but behind older cans, rotating stock by date. A mechanic's habit, a winter habit, a poor man's habit. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten if it could still be used. Outside, wind tapped snow against the windows. Martha found 2 chipped bowls and knelt near the puppies. "Just a little, not too much at once." "You have formula?" Caleb asked. "Some," Walter said. "Powdered. Bought it yesterday." "With what?" Martha asked gently. Walter gave her a look. She sighed. "He sold his old socket set." Walter's jaw tightened. "Had duplicates." "You loved that set." "I loved the dogs not starving more." The sentence came out rough and almost angry, as if tenderness embarrassed him and had to be disguised as irritation. Caleb looked away, giving him the dignity of not being seen too clearly. Martha mixed the food with careful hands. Pip immediately lunged toward the bowl and nearly put both front paws inside it. Juniper stayed back. Bishop lifted his head. He did not move toward her. He simply placed his chin on the floor, eyes soft, breathing slow. Juniper stared at him, then at the bowl. Her small body trembled once. Bishop blinked. After a long moment, Juniper crawled forward and began to eat. Martha's hand went to her mouth. Walter turned toward the window as though the pines had suddenly become fascinating. Caleb felt the room change, not dramatically. No music from heaven, no grand revelation. Just a tiny shift, the way ice begins to loosen from a branch before anyone sees it fall. Bishop had done what Caleb often could not. He had entered a fragile room and made no demands of it. That was when Caleb understood why Walter had trusted him at the store. It had not been Caleb at all. It had been Bishop. The thought should have humbled him. Instead, it felt like relief. Caleb left the puppies eating and moved toward the small generator near the back hall. Walter followed at once. "You don't need to touch that." "Wasn't planning to romance it." "It runs." "Does it?" Walter bristled. "It runs when it feels respected." Caleb crouched and examined the fuel line, the patched cord, the tape around the casing. "That a technical diagnosis?" 42 years working rail engines, I know when a machine's got moods." Caleb glanced back at him. "Machines have problems. People have moods." Walter's eyes narrowed. "You always this cheerful?" "Only after coffee." "You said that already." "I'm consistent." Walter stood over him, arms folded, trying to look annoyed, and accidentally looking less alone. The generator had issues, but not fatal ones. A clogged filter, Loose connection, fuel that had probably sat too long. Caleb could fix enough to make it safer, not enough to trust it through a full blizzard. He told Walter as much. Walter's pride hardened instantly. "It's gotten us through worse." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. "Worse doesn't write guarantees." From the kitchen, Martha said, "Neither does Walter, but we kept him." Walter pointed toward the hallway. "You hear how I'm treated?" "Clearly not well enough," Caleb said. The old man almost smiled again. Almost. While Caleb tightened a connection and checked the cord, his gaze caught on a red envelope lying half beneath a stack of grocery flyers on the kitchen table. It was the color of warning, the kind meant to be seen from across a room. The return address read, Pine Hollow Lots Management Office. Caleb did not touch it, but Walter saw him see it. The change in the old man was immediate. His shoulders lifted, his hand moved too fast. He crossed to the table, took the envelope, folded it once, then twice, and slipped it under a tin ashtray that held no ashes. A wound covered by a bandage too small. Martha went still near the sink. Caleb returned his attention to the generator, but the room had already admitted another presence. Not a person, a pressure. The sort of thing that sat at kitchen tables long after meals were over. "Land company," Walter said. Caleb nodded once. "Routine." Caleb nodded again. Martha dried her hands slowly on a dish towel. "It isn't routine, Walter." "Martha." "He saw it." "That doesn't make it his business." "No," she said softly, "but it makes it real." Walter looked at her then, and the anger left his face so quickly, Caleb almost missed what replaced it. Fear, not fear of Caleb. Not fear of the company, fear of being unable to protect the one person who still believed he could. Martha did not reach for the envelope. Instead, she opened a drawer and took out a small notebook. Its cover was blue once, now rubbed nearly gray at the corners. She set it on the table. Walter's voice dropped. "Don't." She looked down at the notebook. "We keep saying the money is less every month." "It is." "I know it is." Her fingers rested on the cover. "But I don't understand why." Caleb stood slowly. He should have said he had to get back. He should have let them keep the shape of their pride. There were rules to entering another person's trouble, even when no one said them aloud. Knock first, step carefully. Do not touch what is already bleeding. But Bishop had not moved from the floor. Juniper had finished eating and now stood at the edge of the puppy box, looking toward Walter. Pip slept with his nose in the empty bowl, defeated by abundance. Caleb looked at the red envelope. "What kind of money?" he asked. Walter's head turned sharply. Martha answered before pride could shut the door. "His railroad pension, Social Security, mine too. It comes in, but then—" She opened the notebook. Inside were numbers, dates, payments, scribbles, question marks. Amounts circled twice. Words like processing fee, land maintenance, insurance adjustment, winter road surcharge, online portal service. Caleb recognized the pattern before he understood the details. Death by inches, not a robbery in an alley, not a villain with a knife. Something cleaner, something printed, something with customer service hours and a logo. Walter tapped the table once. "We pay what we owe." "I believe you," Caleb said. That answer seemed to disarm him more than argument would have. Martha picked up one of the papers and handed it to Caleb. "This one says we have to log in to see the full notice. We don't have a computer anymore. The library prints things, but the password changes. Then the phone sends a number, and half the time the phone doesn't ring unless Walter stands by the kitchen window holding it like he's praying to it." Walter muttered, "Phone's a coward." Caleb studied the notice. Too many lines, too many small fees, too much language designed to make confusion feel like failure. "You own the home?" he asked. Walter nodded. "Bought it 12 years ago. Cash. Wasn't much then, less now. But not the land. No, rent the lot. His face tightened. If they push us off, moving this place would cost more than it's worth. Frame's old, axle's gone. It'd break apart before it got to the main road. Martha looked toward the puppies. So we stay until they tell us we can't. The words hung in the room, small and terrible. Outside, snow thickened against the window. Inside, the puppies slept near the heater, fed for now, warm for now. There was a cruelty in that phrase, Caleb thought. For now. Much of life was hidden inside it. He folded the notice carefully and set it back on the table. I'm not a lawyer. Walter gave a dry laugh. That's the best thing you've said all day. I know people who know forms. You collect those too? Only when they're blocking the road. Martha smiled faintly, but Walter did not. He was staring at the notebook as if it had betrayed him. Caleb reached into his jacket and took out a small card. It had his name, his number, and nothing else. He placed it beside the blue notebook. Walter did not pick it up. Caleb did not force him. I'll get your truck looked at when the road clears enough, Caleb said. For now, keep the generator off unless you need it. Fuel line's not safe for long runs. Walter stared at the card. Martha said, Thank you. Walter still did not speak. Caleb gathered his gloves and moved toward the door. Bishop rose slowly, joints stiff, then paused. Instead of following Caleb at once, he walked to Walter. The old man looked down at him. What? Bishop pressed his muzzle gently against Walter's hand. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough. Walter's fingers opened by instinct, and the card, still lying on the table, seemed suddenly louder than any spoken request. The old man scowled at the dog. You've got too many opinions. Bishop kept his muzzle there. Walter held the stare for 3 long seconds. Then he reached out, took Caleb's card from the table, and shoved it into the pocket of his canvas coat as if confiscating evidence. Martha turned away, pretending to adjust the puppy blanket. Caleb opened the door. Cold air swept in, sharp with pine and snow. He looked once more at the narrow home, the clean counters, the crooked Christmas lights, the red envelope under the ashtray, the 2 puppies sleeping beneath patched towels, and Walter standing with one hand in his pocket over a phone number he had not wanted to need. Road may close by evening, Caleb said. Keep the phone near the window. Walter grunted. Phone likes the view. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Bishop followed, slow but steady. Behind them, the little manufactured home glowed weakly against the white woods, half its Christmas lights burning, half dark. It looked, Caleb thought, like a stubborn lantern in the hand of someone walking through a storm. Not bright enough to defeat winter, but bright enough to be found. The storm did not arrive like a beast, it arrived like a clerk. Quietly at first, laying one white sheet over another, covering roads, porches, mailboxes, windshield wipers, and all the small evidence that people had places to go. By the second morning, White Pine Falls had become a town of muffled engines and half-open doors. By the third, the mountain road looked less like a road and more like a rumor winter had decided to erase. Caleb Rourke should have stayed home. That was what sensible men did when weather turned serious. They checked the generator, stacked the firewood, made coffee strong enough to argue with God, and waited for the county plows to remember them. But each morning, after feeding Bishop and checking the old dog's hip, Caleb found himself loading the truck anyway. Firewood, batteries, a tin of coffee, 2 small bags of puppy food. Once, because he could not stop himself, a jar of honey. By the third trip, he had stopped pretending it was only caution. Bishop knew before he did. The German shepherd waited by the door after breakfast, collar on, amber eyes steady, as if Caleb's excuses were too boring to honor. "You're getting pushy in your old age," Caleb said. Bishop gave a slow blink. Caleb zipped his faded pine green jacket over his olive combat shirt and grabbed his gloves. "Fine, but if Walter yells at me again, you're handling diplomacy." The drive to Pine Hollow lots was worse each time. Creek Hollow Lane had narrowed under snowbanks, and the pines on either side bent low, turning the road into a white tunnel. Caleb drove carefully, one hand loose on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. Old training remained inside him like a second skeleton. Assess, adjust, continue. But this road was not a battlefield. The enemy was not visible. That made it harder somehow. At the Baines place, smoke still rose from the chimney pipe. Half the old Christmas lights glowed beneath their frosting of snow. The manufactured home looked smaller every morning, as if winter were leaning closer to hear whether it still had a heartbeat. Walter opened the door before Caleb knocked. "You lost?" the old man asked. "No." "Shame. That would explain it." Caleb lifted the bundle of wood from his truck bed. "Brought kindling." "I've got kindling." "You've got damp sticks and optimism." Walter scowled. "Optimism burns if you're stubborn enough." From inside, Martha called, "Then Walter should have heated the house for 40 years. Caleb heard her before he saw her, and that alone told him something had changed. On the first day, Martha had apologized for every step he took inside. By the third, she had begun speaking from another room, trusting him to enter with snow on his boots and not take more dignity than he was offered. The kitchen smelled of tea, wood smoke, and puppy breath. Pip had claimed Caleb's knit cap as a personal kingdom. The puppy slept inside it near the heater, one paw hanging over the edge, his little belly round from breakfast. Juniper remained beneath Martha's sewing chair, but she no longer hid her whole body. Her head rested on her paws, eyes following Bishop as he entered, and lowered himself with a grunt near the door. Bishop did not block the way. He simply became part of it. Walter watched him. "Dog looks worse every day." "He's old." "So am I. Nobody brings me joint medicine." Martha set a mug of tea on the table. "You refuse to take yours unless I threaten you with soup." "Soup is not a threat." "It can be, depending how I make it." Caleb took the tea because refusing Martha now felt more impolite than accepting. It was stronger than before. Still not good exactly, but no longer water-wearing a tea costume. On the table lay the blue notebook. Not hidden this time. That, more than the tea, told Caleb the door had opened another inch. Walter sat across from him, arms folded, eyes fixed somewhere near the window rather than on Caleb's face. Martha placed several envelopes beside the notebook. Red, white, pale blue. Different companies, same small print. Caleb did not reach for them immediately. "Only if you want me to look," he said. Walter made a rough sound. "I don't want anybody to look." Martha lowered herself into the chair beside him. "But we need somebody to understand." That silenced him. Caleb opened the first notice, then the second. Then the third. The truth was not hidden like treasure. It was scattered like broken glass. Social Security deposits came in on the same dates. Walter's old railroad pension arrived too, smaller but steady. Martha had a modest benefit of her own. The money had not vanished before reaching them. It vanished after. Automatic withdrawals, late fees, processing charges, third-party payment service, insurance adjustment, winter road maintenance, duplicate winter road maintenance, online access fee, paper statement fee, returned notice fee, despite the notice never being returned. The amounts were not huge by themselves. $12 here, $28 there, $43, $75, $106, small teeth, many bites. Walter watched Caleb's expression change. "Don't say it." "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking it." "I'm thinking a lot of things." "Try thinking quieter." Martha looked at the papers. He thought the benefits were being reduced. We both did. Caleb traced one line with his finger. "They're not reduced. They're being eaten." Walter's face hardened. "By who?" "That's the problem." Caleb looked at the pile again. Not one wolf, a whole field of ticks. Pip woke, sneezed, and fell back asleep inside the hat. For some reason, that nearly broke the room. Martha pressed her fingers against her mouth, not laughing, not crying, just caught in between. Walter looked at the puppy, then away, his pride trying to stand guard over a grief too tired to fight. Later, while Martha warmed soup on the stove, Caleb noticed Walter at the counter splitting a pill with a pocket knife. Not using a pill cutter, not careless either. He did it with the precision of a man shaving metal from a bolt. Martha saw Caleb see it. Walter saw both of them. "It's prescribed twice a day," Martha said quietly. "It works once a day if you don't complain so much," Walter replied. Caleb did not comment. A few minutes later, Martha stirred a small piece of chicken from her own bowl into the puppy's food. She did it with such practiced stealth that Caleb knew it had happened before. Juniper crept from beneath the chair only after Bishop set his head near the bowl, his breathing slow, his body low, making no claim. The puppy ate. Walter pretended not to watch. Caleb pretended not to notice him pretending. By afternoon, when the snow eased enough for the library road to open, Caleb packed the papers into a folder Martha gave him. It was decorated with faded roses and held closed by a rubber band so old it looked like it had survived 3 presidents. Walter stood by the door. "You don't have to go making this town's business." "It already is," Caleb said. "The town just doesn't know yet." The White Pine Falls Public Library occupied a brick building beside the old post office, warm-windowed and stubborn, with 2 stone lions outside, wearing snow caps placed there by some unknown citizen with a sense of humor. Inside, the air smelled of dust, printer toner, wet wool, and coffee that had no official permission to be there. Nora Voss ruled the front desk like a queen who had chosen books over armies. She was in her 60s, with silver-gray hair cut to her jaw and red-framed glasses hanging from a chain. A cardigan the color of storm clouds draped over a dark turtleneck, and a yellow highlighter rested behind one ear like a weapon. When Caleb placed the folder on her desk, she looked at it, then at him, then at Bishop, who had stretched out politely near the entrance mat. "Tell me that isn't another man bringing me paperwork after ignoring it for 6 months," she said. "It's not mine." "That's what they all say before asking if the printer can fax." "I know how to fax." Nora looked unimpressed. "That's not the flex you think it is?" Caleb almost smiled. He explained as little as possible and handed her the notices. Nora read fast. Too fast, Caleb thought, until he saw that her expression changed only when something mattered. Her mouth tightened at the duplicate winter road fee. Her eyebrows rose at the third-party processing charge. When she reached the online portal notices, she removed the highlighter from behind her ear and began marking lines with the severity of a judge sentencing weeds. "This," she said after several minutes, "is not a dramatic scam." Caleb waited. "It's worse. It's ordinary." Nora tapped one paper. "A company buys the land lease accounts, migrates everything to a payment portal, adds convenience fees, penalizes paper, requires verification codes for people whose phones barely work. Then every missed login becomes a fee. Every fee becomes a balance. Every balance becomes leverage." She turned another page. "And because none of this looks like a man in a ski mask, everyone tells themselves it's legal." "Is it?" "Some of it. Some of it smells like a raccoon died in a filing cabinet." Bishop lifted his head at the word raccoon. "No," Caleb told him. "Not that kind." Nora glanced down at the dog. "Good hips? Bad hips? Good judgment. Shame." Most people have the reverse. She pulled a legal pad closer. They need Evelyn Price. Who's that? County Social Services. Calm woman, terrifies bureaucracy by reading instructions all the way to the end. Nora wrote a number with quick strokes. She can check heating assistance, food support, senior benefits, and whether these fees create grounds for a delay. Caleb shifted. Walter won't like more people involved? Nora looked at him over her glasses. Walter doesn't like gravity either, but he still participates. He has pride. So do I. Mine learned to fill out forms. She slid the number across the desk. Self-respect should not be left outside in the cold because it doesn't know where to sign. That stayed with Caleb, not because it sounded noble, because it sounded usable. Before he left, Nora copied the notices, printed a checklist, and handed him a fresh folder with tabs. Caleb stared at it. What's this? A beginning. Looks like homework. It is. Try not to eat the pencil. From the library, Caleb drove to a low white farmhouse outside town, where a hand-painted sign near the driveway read Whitaker Veterinary Care. Limited hours, unlimited opinions. Sam Whitaker opened the door before Caleb knocked, as if expecting trouble, and disappointed it had arrived on time. He was tall and thin, with white hair standing in several directions, a short gray beard, rubber boots, and a barn coat that looked older than some roads. His eyes were bright, amused, and already judging Caleb. You finally bringing Bishop in because he's overweight? Sam asked. He's not overweight. Behind Caleb, Bishop sighed heavily. Sam pointed at him. That dog just confessed. Caleb brought Pip and Juniper inside in a crate, borrowed from Darla. Pip barked once at the smell of disinfectant and immediately tried to lick the crate door. Juniper pressed herself into the back corner, trembling. Sam's voice changed then. Not softer exactly. Lower. Slower. Well, hello, little weather survivors. He examined them on a towel-covered table under warm light. He did not rush. He let Juniper smell the stethoscope. He let Pip bite the end of it and declared the instrument medically doomed. He checked their ribs, gums, ears, paws, eyes, temperature, and bellies. Mildly underweight, Sam said at last. Dehydrated before, better now. Some irritation on the paws. They were outside in wet cold at least a night, maybe more. Lucky someone found them. Caleb thought of Martha holding them beneath that blanket. Shelter was full, he said. Shelters are always full before storms, Sam muttered. People discover compassion right after inconvenience. He gave Caleb food recommendations, a vaccine schedule, and a look of such professional disappointment that Caleb felt 16 years old. And Bishop? Sam asked. He's fine. Bishop is a German Shepherd over 9 with a veteran owner who says fine like it's a medical plan. Put him on the scale. Bishop looked at Caleb with quiet betrayal. Orders, Caleb said. The dog stepped on the scale. Sam read the number and whistled. Colonel Butterball. Bishop stared at him like an offended monarch considering war. Caleb rubbed his forehead. He's not that bad. He's not bad. He's majestic in a slightly expanded way. Sam wrote something down. Cut treats, more joint support, gentle walks, no icy stairs. He hates being managed. He's a retired working dog. Of course he does. So do you. That landed closer than Caleb liked. By the time Caleb returned to his cabin, the storm had deepened again. Evening pressed blue against the windows. The cabin was warm, stacked with supplies, clean to the point of accusation. Firelight moved over the wood floor. Nothing was missing. That was the problem. Nothing was out of place. No teacup left near the sink by another hand. No patched towel drying by the stove. No old man muttering at a generator. No woman hiding chicken in a puppy bowl. No foolish little dog asleep inside a stolen hat. Caleb fed Bishop, then sat on the hearthrug to rub the old shepherd's hip. Bishop groaned and leaned into his hand. Age had become more honest in him lately. It no longer asked permission before showing itself. Caleb's thumb moved along the scarred edge of Bishop's collar. Stay close. The words had once been a command, then a habit, then a prayer. What happens when you don't? Caleb asked quietly. Bishop rested his head against Caleb's knee. Outside, winter pressed its white face to the windows. Inside, the cabin held its heat perfectly and still felt hollow. Caleb looked toward the folder Nora had given him, now lying on the table beside his untouched coffee. He had told himself he was helping the Baineses because they needed it. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Maybe he had recognized the look of a house trying to keep standing. Maybe he had recognized Walter's rage at needing help. Maybe he had recognized Martha's gentle terror of having too little warmth to divide among everyone she loved. Or maybe, Caleb thought as Bishop's breathing slowed beneath his hand, he had simply seen 2 old people, 2 abandoned puppies, and a winter coming down hard, and understood that one day, if he was not careful, no one would be close enough to notice when his own light went out. He opened the folder. Then he picked up his phone and typed Evelyn Price's number into his contacts. He did not call yet, not that night, but he saved it. And in the quiet cabin, that small act felt less like paperwork than a promise. Nora Voss did not ask Walter Baines whether he wanted help. She knew better than that. Some people, especially old men with ruined knuckles and too much pride, treated help like a trap set under leaves. If you asked them directly, they would limp around it until they froze. So Nora did what she had learned to do after 30 years of library work, 3 town budget fights, and 1 memorable argument with a copier that had briefly convinced the mayor it was possessed. She announced a meeting, not a charity meeting, not a rescue meeting, not anything with the word assistance printed on a flyer, because Walter would rather sleep in a snowbank than attend that. The sign taped to the front door of the White Pine Falls Library read, "Pine Hollow Lot Fees. Bring notices, questions, and bad handwriting. St. Anselm's basement, 6 p.m. Coffee provided. Dignity optional, but encouraged." When Caleb saw the flyer, he looked at Nora across the library desk. "Dignity optional?" Nora capped her yellow highlighter. "It gets in the way of accurate forms." Caleb folded the flyer and put it in his jacket pocket. "Walter won't come." "Of course he won't." "Then why hold it?" Nora looked at him over her red-framed glasses. "Because Martha will read it. Then Walter will spend 4 hours saying he isn't going. Then he'll go, but angrily. Men like him need the illusion of resistance. It keeps their joints moving." She was not wrong. By late afternoon, the storm had loosened its grip on White Pine Falls, leaving behind bright, hard cold. The world outside shone beneath fresh snow, every branch and rooftop outlined in white, the kind of beauty that looked peaceful from behind glass and murderous once you stepped into it. At the Baines home, Caleb found Walter standing in the kitchen with his coat on, but his boots untied, performing the ancient masculine ceremony of refusing to leave while clearly preparing to leave. "I'm not going," Walter said. Martha, seated near the heater with Pip and Juniper in a laundry basket lined with towels, did not look up. "Then why are you wearing your good hat?" "This is not my good hat." "It's the one without the burn hole." "That makes it the less ruined hat." Caleb leaned against the counter and let them work it out. Bishop lay near the door, head on his paws, watching the exchange with the solemn patience of a dog who had seen humans complicate simple missions for years. Walter pointed at Caleb. "You put her up to this?" "Nora did." "Same tribe." "I'm not sure Nora has a tribe. I think she reproduces by correcting paperwork." Martha smiled into her tea. Walter's scowl deepened, but his eyes drifted toward the puppies. Pip had one paw over the edge of the basket, trying to reach Walter's dangling bootlace. Juniper was awake, pressed into Martha's side, her gaze moving every few seconds toward the door. "They can't stay here alone," Martha said softly. "We won't be gone long." "She means she doesn't want them out of sight," Caleb said. Walter gave him a look. "Did I ask you to translate my wife?" "No." "Then don't." Bishop rose. It took effort. His bad hip made the movement slow, almost grand, like an old king standing because the court had become ridiculous. He crossed the kitchen, picked up one of Walter's leather gloves from the chair, and carried it toward the door. Walter stared. "Put that down." Bishop did not. He placed the glove on the mat, then sat in front of it, blocking the exit with all the quiet authority of a retired sergeant who had finished listening. Martha laughed first, not loudly, just enough to make Walter's ears turn pink. Caleb looked down at Bishop. Subtle. Walter snatched the glove from the mat. "That dog's got command issues." "He prefers clarity," Caleb said. "I preferred him when he was lying down." Bishop blinked. 10 minutes later, Walter tied his boots. Street. Anselm's church sat near the center of town, a white wooden building with a square bell tower, green shutters, and a front walkway shoveled clean by people who believed snow was not an excuse to disappoint God. Light spilled from the basement windows onto the snowbanks, warm and golden, making the church look less like a building than a lantern someone had set down in winter. The basement smelled of coffee, old wood, damp wool, and bread warming in foil trays. Folding tables lined one wall. A long bulletin board displayed notices about snow shoveling volunteers, senior rides, food pantry hours, and a choir rehearsal canceled because half the choir had come down with what Reverend Amos Bell called the Methodist cough, though St. Anselm's was not Methodist, and no one knew why he said it. Amos himself stood near the coffee urn, large, gray-bearded, and wrapped in a brown cardigan that made him look like a friendly bear with theological training. He had the sort of face that invited confession and the sort of laugh that made even folding chairs seem less resentful. "Walter Baines," Amos called when they entered. "I was beginning to think you'd been raptured without telling the rest of us." Walter removed his hat. "If I get raptured, Reverend, you'll hear complaining from the clouds." "I would expect nothing less." Martha smiled shyly as Amos took the puppy basket from her arms and set it carefully near the front row. Pip immediately tried to chew the corner of a church pamphlet. Juniper tucked herself low until Bishop settled beside the basket. Then she lifted her head. Darla Finch had come straight from North Lantern Market, still in her blue polo beneath a mustard-colored coat, her keyring jingling at her hip. She placed a box of discounted cookies on the refreshments table and announced, "These are not stale. They are spiritually firm." Sam Whitaker stood beside her, examining the cookies with medical suspicion. "That one could chip a tooth." "You're a vet," Darla said. "I respect all molars." Nora arrived last without looking hurried, though she was clearly the reason everyone else was there. She carried 3 folders, a legal pad, and a tote bag full of highlighters. She wore a navy turtleneck and a gray cardigan, her red glasses low on her nose, looking less like a librarian and more like a woman prepared to arrest a spreadsheet. Caleb stayed near the back wall. It felt important not to stand too close to Walter. This was not Caleb's story to carry, not fully. He had brought papers, made calls, asked questions. But the humiliation belonged to Walter, and so did the courage of showing up. People filtered in slowly. A retired bus driver from Lot 8. A widow named Mrs. Keene who brought every envelope she owned in a grocery bag. A quiet man in a camouflage cap who kept saying he was just listening. 2 sisters from the far end of Pine Hollow who argued about whether an online portal was a website or that Blue Demon page. Walter sat beside Martha, jaw set, eyes forward. He looked like a man attending his own sentencing. Then Graham Pike walked in. No one announced him. The room simply noticed. He came down the basement stairs in a dark wool coat with a neat scarf tucked beneath the collar, shoes clean despite the weather, hair combed into place as if snow had no authority over him. He was in his mid-40s, lean, pale from office light rather than winter, with a leather tablet case under one arm. His expression was polite, prepared, and almost warm enough to pass inspection. Almost. "Good evening," he said, offering a practiced nod to Reverend Amos. "I'm Graham Pike, Regional Manager for Pine Hollow Lots." Nora smiled without showing teeth. "Wonderful. We love a man who brings his own documents." Graham looked toward the tables, the residents, the folders, the puppies, the large German shepherd beside them, and finally Caleb near the wall. His eyes paused for half a second on Caleb's combat shirt sleeves and boots, then moved on. "I understand there are concerns," Graham said. Walter muttered, "Concerns. That's one word." Martha touched his sleeve. Nora took the front of the room. "We're not here to shout. We're here to understand the fee structure, payment notices, late charges, and possible errors affecting Pine Hollow residents." "Of course," Graham said. "Transparency is important to us." Darla whispered to Sam, "That means no." Sam whispered back, "That means he owns 3 pens." Graham opened his tablet case and began speaking in the calm tone of a man who trusted language to hide sharp edges. He explained that Pine Hollow Lots had changed ownership 2 years earlier. Modernization was necessary. Digital notices reduced costs. Third-party processing streamlined payments. Lot maintenance fees reflected rising winter expenses. Insurance compliance protected residents and company assets alike. Every sentence was smooth. Every sentence sounded as if it had been born in a conference room far from snow. Walter's face reddened, but he did not interrupt. Caleb saw the effort it cost him. Martha held her hands folded in her lap so tightly her knuckles paled. Then Nora began asking questions. Not dramatic questions. Worse. Specific ones. Why was Lot 14 charged twice for winter road maintenance in November? Graham looked down at his tablet. That may reflect carryover billing. Why was Lot 6 charged a paper statement fee after opting into digital notices, then a late fee because the digital notice failed? I'd have to review the account. Why does the portal require a verification code sent to phones that several residents report cannot receive the message inside their homes due to poor service? That is standard security. Standard for whom? The room shifted. A man near the back lifted his hand. Mine does that too. Mrs. Keene raised her grocery bag. I brought all mine. I thought I was just stupid. No one laughed. That was the moment the room changed, not because a secret had been exposed, but because shame had lost its privacy. Caleb watched Walter hear it. The old man turned slightly, just enough to see the others. Their envelopes, their confusion, their embarrassment. All the little private defeats brought into the open and laid beneath church lights. Walter had thought he was alone inside his failure. He was not. Somehow that made it hurt less and more. Graham closed his tablet cover gently. I want to be clear. No one is being targeted. The Baines account, for example, is simply overdue. If the balance is not resolved, the lease terms allow proceedings to begin after the seasonal hold period ends. Martha flinched at the word proceedings. Walter stood. The room went quiet before he spoke. Caleb straightened from the wall, but did not move forward. Walter held his cap in both hands. His fingers worried the edge of it, twisting wool that had already survived too many winters. When he began, his voice was rough and smaller than anger would have liked. I worked 40 years around rail engines, he said. Started when men still thought frostbite was something you walked off if the foreman was watching. A few people smiled faintly. Walter did not. I paid bills I understood. I paid rent, electric, fuel, insurance. I paid doctors who kept sending me envelopes after I thought dying would be cheaper. He looked at Graham then, not hateful, just tired. I don't mind owing what I owe. The basement seemed to lean toward him. What I mind, Walter continued, is getting a letter saying I owe something I never heard of. Then another letter saying I owe more because I didn't answer the first one right. Then a phone telling me it sent a number I never got. Then a machine telling me I'm locked out because I tried too many times. His hands tightened around the cap. I'm not asking anybody to wipe my slate clean. I'm not asking this town to pass a hat because I got old and forgot how the world works. His voice cracked just once, and he swallowed it down hard. I'm asking for someone to explain it in human words before you take the ground from under my wife's home. No one spoke. Not Nora, not Caleb, not even Darla, whose key ring had gone silent at her side. Martha looked at Walter as if she were seeing him stand in some terrible weather all over again, younger and older at the same time. Graham's face did not change much. Men trained in professional calm rarely allowed themselves the mercy of expression. But his eyes moved down to his tablet and stayed there a little too long. Then a chair scraped near the back. Mrs. Keene stood, grocery bag clutched in both hands. I got one, too, a red notice. I didn't bring it to anyone because I thought— Her mouth trembled. I thought I'd made a fool of myself. The man in the camouflage cap raised his envelope. My maintenance fee doubled. Road ain't even plowed past my place half the time. One of the sisters from the far end of Pine Hollow waved a paper. They charged us for a pet registration. We don't have a pet, unless raccoons count, and those freeloaders refuse paperwork. A nervous laugh passed through the room. It did not break the seriousness. It made it bearable. Nora began collecting papers like a woman gathering sparks before they went out. Darla moved from person to person with cookies that could, perhaps, survive artillery. Sam examined Pip after the puppy attempted to eat a napkin. Bishop remained beside Juniper, who now sat upright in the basket, watching Walter. Graham tried once more. I understand the frustration, but lease agreements are binding documents. Pine Hollow lots cannot operate on verbal interpretations of hardship. Reverend Amos, who had been quiet until then, set down the coffee pot. He looked at Graham with a sadness that was not soft. Mr. Pike, he said, does your mother live alone? The question struck oddly. Graham blinked. Excuse me? Your mother, does she live alone? A faint edge appeared in Graham's voice. She's in assisted living. Amos nodded. If she received one of these letters, would she understand it? Graham opened his mouth. No answer came quickly enough. The room did not attack him. That was worse, Caleb thought. No one shouted. No one gave Graham the shelter of becoming defensive. They simply waited while the question stood in front of him like a door he had not meant to open. At that moment, the basement door swung inward and cold air spilled down the stairs. A woman stepped in, carrying a black waterproof folder under one arm, snow dusting the shoulders of her camel-colored coat. She paused to stamp her boots, then came down with a steady, unhurried walk of someone who had learned that panic made paperwork worse. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun streaked with silver, and her eyes took in the room in one practiced sweep. Residents, notices, manager, dogs, coffee, tension. Nora, she said, the county plow got sentimental and abandoned me near Mill Road. Nora lifted a hand. Evelyn, you're late, but dramatically. Evelyn Price did not smile much. She did not need to. Calm seemed to enter with her like another form of heat. She took the front folder from Nora, scanned the top page, then another. Graham watched her with the expression of a man realizing the room had acquired someone who knew where signatures mattered. Evelyn looked at Walter and Martha. "You're Mr. and Mrs. Baines?" Martha nodded. Walter said, "Depends who's asking." "County Social Services." She opened her planner. "I ask slowly and write everything down." Walter seemed unsure whether to respect that or fear it. Evelyn turned a page. "Based on what I'm seeing, there may be grounds to request a temporary halt on any removal proceedings while fees are reviewed. Not a victory. Not yet. A delay." Martha's breath caught. Walter looked away. Evelyn continued, "But delays require documentation, payment history, notices, lease copies, other residents with similar charges, signatures, dates. We move quickly, or winter moves for us." The room absorbed that. A delay was not salvation, but a delay was not nothing. Pip, perhaps sensing that solemnity had gone unchallenged too long, barked once from the basket. Everyone turned. Sam said, "Motion seconded." A few people laughed, and this time the sound stayed in the room. Caleb looked at Walter. Walter looked at Martha. Martha did not plead. She only held his gaze, one hand resting near the puppies, the other curled over the edge of her coat. Walter looked down at Bishop. The old German shepherd gazed back, steady and unreadable. Then Juniper, small and dark-eyed, stood in the basket and placed both front paws on the rim as if trying to see him better. Walter exhaled. It was not surrender. It was the sound of a man setting down a weight long enough to let others see the bruises. "All right," he said. Nora uncapped her highlighter. Evelyn opened her planner. Darla's keys jingled as she moved to pour more coffee. And beneath street. Anselm's, while snow gathered against the basement windows like a quiet crowd outside, the people of White Pine Falls began passing their red envelopes forward. Evelyn Price had a way of saying hard things without making them heavier. She sat at the Baines kitchen table the morning after the meeting, her planner open beside a stack of forms, her black folder resting near the blue notebook Martha had once been afraid to show anyone. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time in days. Sunlight struck the snow so brightly that the whole world beyond the window seemed made of glass. Inside, no one mistook brightness for mercy. Walter stood near the stove with his arms folded, looking at Evelyn as though she were a weather report he intended to disbelieve. Martha sat with Pip and Juniper in her lap, one puppy chewing the corner of her cardigan, the other tucked under her hand like a frightened thought. Caleb leaned against the counter, quiet, while Bishop rested near the back door, his old head raised enough to follow every voice. Sam Whitaker had come too, carrying his battered medical bag and a paper cup of coffee he had already insulted twice. "The good news," Evelyn said, "is that we can request a temporary halt on any removal process while the fees are reviewed." Walter grunted. "That's good news?" "It's better than a notice nailed to the door," Sam said. Walter pointed at him. "Nobody asked the animal doctor." "Animals have better sense than people. Makes me overqualified." Martha's mouth moved in a tired, almost smile, but her hand remained curled protectively around Juniper. Evelyn continued, "The difficult part is this. Even if the land issue gets delayed, the next few weeks are still going to be hard. Heating, transportation, food, medical costs. For you and for the puppies." Walter's eyes sharpened. "We're feeding them." "No one said you weren't trying," Caleb said quietly. Walter turned on him. "Trying's all some people have left." The room went still. Caleb accepted the blow because it had not really been aimed at him. It had come from the place in Walter where pride and fear had begun chewing the same bone. Sam set his coffee down and crouched near Martha. He did not take the puppies from her. He knew better. He only held out 2 fingers for Pip to sniff. Pip attempted to bite them with great enthusiasm. "Strong jaws," Sam said. "Terrible manners. Promising citizen." Then he looked at Juniper, who had flattened herself beneath Martha's palm. They're improving, but they need consistent food, shots, warmth, training. Not someday. Now. Puppies don't wait politely for human paperwork to settle. Martha lowered her eyes. Walter looked toward the wall of tools as though somewhere between the wrench and the pliers there might be an answer. Caleb felt the words waiting in him. He disliked them before he said them. I can foster them. Martha looked up. Walter did not. Caleb kept his voice plain. Not adopt, not take, foster, temporary. Through the worst of the weather, until the paperwork moves and Sam gets them started right. They'd have space at my cabin. Bishop's used to young dogs. Bishop's ears moved slightly, as if he objected to the phrase used to. Pip wriggled in Martha's lap and sneezed on her sleeve. Temporary, Martha repeated. Evelyn nodded. That distinction matters. It means care support, not abandonment. Walter's jaw tightened. Fancy word for handing over what you can't afford? No, Martha said softly. Everyone turned to her. She was looking down at the puppies, but her voice was steadier than Caleb expected. No, Walter, it's a word that lets them stay loved while we catch our breath. Walter stared at her. For a moment he looked older than 78. Not weaker, just less armored. Caleb wondered how many times in their marriage Martha had saved him from mistaking pain for principle. Walter reached for his cap on the table, though he was not going outside. He twisted it between both hands. Fine, he muttered. Temporary. Martha closed her eyes. It was not relief. It was something more complicated. A door opening and a piece of the heart staying behind to hold it. The rest of the morning became busy in the way people become busy when stillness would break them. Martha went to her sewing table by the window, where sunlight spilled across spools of thread, fabric scraps, and the little daisy tin that had belonged to her mother. She chose 2 pieces from an old sweater Caleb had seen hanging over a chair the day before. One strip was red-brown, warm as brick in a stove. The other was soft sage green, pale and calm. For their necks, she said. Walter stood behind her. Dogs don't need scarves. Neither do you, apparently, and yet I've kept you from freezing for decades. That was different. Yes, you complained more. She sewed by hand because the old machine jammed whenever the air grew damp. Her fingers moved slowly but surely, folding the cloth, stitching the edges, making something useful out of something worn. Pip fell asleep beside her foot. Juniper watched the needle pass through fabric as if trying to understand how small piercings could hold something together. Walter disappeared into the back room. Caleb heard the soft clink of metal, the scrape of a drawer, the faint curse of a man who had dropped something and blamed gravity personally. When he came back, he carried 2 small pieces of thin metal in his palm. Scrap, he said before anyone asked. He sat at the kitchen table with a file, a punch, and an old railroad folding knife. With stubborn care, he rounded the corners, smoothed the edges, and scratched letters into each tag. Pip. Juniper. The letters were uneven. Pip's name leaned upward as if trying to run away. Juniper's was slower, deeper, each line cut with more patience than Walter would ever admit. Caleb watched him attach Pip's tag first. The old man grumbled when Pip tried to chew the metal before it was on. Idiot dog, Walter muttered. Pip wagged, delighted by the title. Then Walter took Juniper's tag. The darker puppy sat very still on Martha's lap, eyes lifted toward him. Walter's fingers, scarred and stiff from cold, fumbled with the ring. Once, twice. The tag slipped and tapped the table. No one moved to help. That was mercy, too. Walter tried again. His hand trembled, not much, but enough for him to notice. He turned his face toward the window, pretending to check the weather. Martha reached out and covered his wrist. not to steady him, to tell him she had seen and would not shame him for it. Walter swallowed hard. "Thing's too small." "It is," she said. He fastened the tag. Juniper sniffed his knuckles. Walter pulled his hand back too quickly, then looked annoyed at himself for retreating. "There," he said. "Now nobody can mix them up." Martha tied the sage scarf around Juniper's neck. Caleb looked away for a second because the room had become too intimate, and he had spent years avoiding rooms exactly like that. By noon, the crate was in Caleb's truck. The goodbye did not happen all at once. That would have been easier. It happened in pieces. Martha packed the towel Pip liked. Walter insisted on sending a small bag of the food Caleb had bought, so they don't start thinking rich. Martha tucked a scrap of her cardigan into the crate because Juniper kept pressing her nose into it. Walter checked the latch twice and told Caleb how to fasten it properly, though Caleb had transported dogs under conditions Walter would never imagine. Caleb listened anyway. Finally, Martha knelt in the snow beside the crate before Caleb loaded it. Pip licked her chin. Juniper pressed herself into Martha's hands and stayed there. "You're not being left," Martha whispered. "You hear me? You're just going where there's room to grow." Walter stood on the porch, one hand gripping the rail. Caleb lifted the crate carefully into the truck. Bishop climbed into the back seat with effort and settled where both puppies could see him. The drive back to Caleb's cabin was quieter than the drive to Pine Hollow had been days earlier. Pip whined once, then discovered the corner of the towel and began attacking it with heroic focus. Juniper stayed near the crate door, watching the passing pines, her new tag clicking softly whenever the truck turned. Caleb heard that tiny sound all the way home. His cabin sat on a rise above a frozen creek built of dark timber and stone, with a metal roof that shed snow in heavy sighs. It was larger than one man needed. Caleb had told himself that for years and then done nothing about it. The porch was shoveled clean. The firewood was stacked straight. The windows were tight. The generator worked. Nothing leaned. Nothing sagged. Nothing begged for repair. It should have felt safe. Instead, with the puppy crate in his arms, Caleb saw the place as Martha might have seen it, warm, clean, and lonely enough to echo. Inside, Pip declared war on the cabin within 30 seconds. He ran directly across the rug, slid on the wood floor, bumped into a chair leg, recovered with the resilience of a drunk acrobat, and barked at the coffee maker. The machine answered by dripping once. Pip retreated behind Caleb's boot, then barked again from cover. Bishop watched with profound disappointment. "Don't look at me," Caleb said. "He's Foster." Pip found a basket of clean socks near the laundry room and dragged one into the living room like a conquered flag. Caleb shut his eyes. The cabin, which had spent years obeying him, fell within 5 minutes to a creature with one floppy ear and no respect for borders. Juniper did not join the invasion. She stayed near the front door, lying on Martha's scrap of cardigan, eyes fixed in the direction from which they had come. Her sage scarf looked too tender against the dark fur at her neck. Every time wind touched the windows, she lifted her head. Bishop approached her slowly and lay down between her and the room, not blocking her from the door, blocking the room from overwhelming her. Caleb watched them for a long time. Then he looked around his cabin, the neat shelves, the clean counters, the framed map over the mantel, the second coffee mug in the cabinet he never used but never threw away. Years ago, he had bought this place with plans that had sounded sturdy at the time. A wedding after deployment, a garden near the creek, a dog run, a guest room. A normal life, whatever that meant when men said it to each other like a myth they had read about in childhood. Her name had been Leah. He had not spoken it aloud in months. She had not died. That would have been easier for stories and worse for truth. She had simply left after realizing Caleb had returned from war without arriving home. He fixed gutters, sharpened knives, stacked wood, checked locks, woke before dawn, and carried silence into every room like a loaded weapon. In the end, Leah had taken her books, her blue ceramic bowl, and the laugh that used to live near the stove. Caleb had kept the cabin, or the cabin had kept him. Pip charged into the room with a sock in his mouth and tripped over his own feet. Caleb laughed. The sound surprised him so much that Bishop lifted his head. It was not a large laugh, not even a clean one. Rusty, brief, almost embarrassed. But it existed. Pip, encouraged by applause, shook the sock harder. "Criminal," Caleb said. Pip wagged. That evening, Caleb fed the puppies according to Sam's instructions, gave Bishop his joint medicine, and laid 3 blankets near the fire. Pip curled against Caleb's boot, exhausted by conquest. Juniper remained near the door until Bishop shifted closer. Only then did she rest her chin on Martha's scrap of cardigan and sleep. The cabin did not feel peaceful. It felt interrupted. Caleb realized, staring at the sock abandoned beneath the table, that peace and emptiness had been wearing the same coat in his life for too long. 2 days later, when the road cleared enough to travel safely, Caleb brought the puppies back to Pine Hollow for an afternoon visit. Martha was waiting before the truck stopped. She tried to pretend she had only come out to sweep the porch. The broom in her hand had not touched snow. Walter stood behind her with his coat half-buttoned, as if he had been caught in the act of caring. Pip exploded from the crate and ran straight into Martha's legs. Juniper stepped out more slowly, sniffed the air, then walked toward Walter. Walter looked down. "Don't start." Juniper sat beside his boot. "I said don't." She leaned against his ankle. Martha turned away with a smile she did not hide well. Caleb brought the supplies inside. Bishop followed and lowered himself near the heater, supervising the reunion with priestly gravity. For 2 hours, the little home sounded different. Pip stole a dish towel. Martha scolded him gently. Juniper stayed near Walter's chair. Walter pretended to read an old newspaper upside down for 7 full minutes. On the next safe visit, Caleb noticed a folded piece of blanket beneath Walter's chair. He said nothing. On the visit after that, Juniper went straight to it and lay down as if it had always belonged to her. Walter did not look up. "Floor's cold." "Sure," Caleb said. "Don't make that tone." "What tone?" "The one where you think you're clever because you're quiet." Bishop, lying near the door, opened one eye. Then, late in the afternoon, when Martha had gone to the kitchen and Caleb was outside, bringing in a small bag of kindling, Walter sat alone beside Juniper. The puppy lifted her head. Walter lowered his hand, stopped halfway, then muttered something too soft to hear. His fingers touched the fur behind her ear. Once, then again. Juniper closed her eyes. Caleb saw it through the window and stopped on the porch. Bishop stood beside him, having followed without a sound. The old shepherd looked into the room too, amber eyes calm, as if witnessing a sacred confession that required no priest and no words. Caleb did not knock right away. Some moments deserved to remain unannounced. Inside, Walter scratched Juniper's ear with the awkward tenderness of a man repairing a small living hinge in himself. Outside, snow began to fall again, lightly this time, soft as ash from a warm fire. Caleb adjusted the kindling under his arm and waited until Walter's hand withdrew before stepping back inside. No one mentioned what had happened. That was how they honored it. By the time the hearing arrived, the papers had multiplied like rabbits with legal training. Nora Voss had taken over one long table at the White Pine Falls Library and turned it into a command post. Folders stood in rows. Yellow tabs marked duplicate fees. Pink tabs marked missing notices. Blue tabs marked anything Nora described as smelling funny, which had become, over the week, an official category. Caleb had never seen anyone wage war with a printer before. Nora did it without raising her voice. She copied lot agreements, highlighted payment histories, lined up envelopes by date, and forced the library printer through so many pages that it began making a thin whining sound like a kettle begging for mercy. "Machine's dying," Caleb said one afternoon. Nora did not look up. "Then it will die in service." Across the table, Evelyn Price worked with quieter force. Her planner lay open, each task written in small, precise handwriting. She called county offices, left messages, requested program forms, and corrected people on the phone with a politeness so firm it could have held up a roof. Darla brought statements from North Lantern Market, not because a cashier's word could solve the case, but because she had seen the Baineses make hard choices in public. She wrote about the morning Walter tried to leave behind dog food to afford medicine. Her handwriting leaned sideways, apologetic and determined. Sam Whitaker contributed a veterinary estimate for Pip and Juniper's care. He listed food, vaccines, deworming, basic exams, and worming supplies, then added a handwritten note at the bottom. "Puppies are not decorative snow ornaments. They require money, heat, and humans with sense." Nora read it twice. "Sam," she said, "this is not how expert statements are usually written." "Then usual statements need better jokes." Caleb did not contribute much on paper. He drove people where they needed to go. He carried boxes. He called when someone stopped answering Nora. He took Pip and Juniper back and forth between his cabin and the Baines place on clear days, and kept Bishop near him when rooms grew tense. He had learned during those days that help had many shapes. Sometimes it was a check, sometimes a form, sometimes a ride. Sometimes it was standing behind an old man without making him feel pushed. The important discovery came on a Thursday morning after Nora found an old scanned document in the county property system. Walter and Martha's manufactured home had been misclassified, not dramatically, not maliciously, at least not in any way that could be proven. A box had been checked wrong during the ownership transfer of Pine Hollow lots. Their home, Lot 17, had been marked as a short-term rental structure instead of owner-occupied manufactured housing. That one mistake had triggered higher insurance compliance fees, a different maintenance category, and several additional charges meant for seasonal rental units. "That's it?" Walter said when Caleb told him. They were standing in his kitchen, Juniper lying beside his chair on the folded blanket he still refused to discuss. "That's part of it," Caleb said. Walter stared at the printed page. "A box?" "A box!" Martha sank slowly into a chair. Walter's face changed in a way Caleb had not expected. He did not look relieved. He looked insulted at a level deeper than anger. "A box," he repeated. "We've been eating soup 3 nights a week because somebody checked a box." Juniper lifted her head. Walter turned away and gripped the sink with both hands. Caleb let silence stand. There were some sentences a man needed to hear echo inside himself before anyone tried to soften them. Later, Nora found more. The third-party service that had been helping residents manage payments had charged a monthly processing fee. Notices had been sent by email to addresses some residents had not used in years. A winter road fee had been applied twice when Pine Hollow changed snow contractors. Late fees had stacked on other late fees, like snowdrifts against a door no one could open. None of the numbers were large enough to look monstrous alone. Together, they had teeth. The hearing at Town Hall was scheduled for the following Monday. It was not a court. Nora corrected everyone who called it that. It was a municipal review session arranged through County Housing Support and attended by Pine Hollow management, residents, and the town mediator. The phrase sounded harmless, almost sleepy. Still, Walter shaved that morning. Martha noticed before anyone else. She stood in the doorway of the bathroom while Walter scraped a dull razor over his jaw, leaving his silver mustache intact. He wore his brown canvas coat, his navy hat without the burn hole, and the gray scarf Martha had knitted for him years earlier. It was too short on one side because she had run out of yarn, and he had refused to let her buy more. "You look handsome," she said. Walter rinsed the razor. "Don't start rumors." "I started that one in 1968. Should have been arrested for fraud." Martha laughed softly, but her eyes were wet. At Caleb's cabin, Pip treated the morning like a parade. He leapt at Bishop's tail, stole one glove, lost interest, found it again, and then barked at the empty travel crate as if the crate had personally wronged him. Juniper was different. The moment Caleb opened the truck door at the Baines place, she climbed out and went straight to Walter. No hesitation, no greeting for Caleb, no detour toward Martha's hands. She pressed her shoulder against Walter's boot and stayed there. Walter looked down. "Don't make a production," he muttered. Juniper leaned harder. Bishop watched from Caleb's side, old eyes calm. Town Hall stood at the end of Maple Street, a brick building with white columns, a flag snapping in the cold, and snow piled along the steps in clean shoveled walls. Inside, the hallway smelled of wet coats, old varnish, and coffee from a machine that sounded like it was grinding gravel for a living. The review room held wooden chairs, a long table, a humming space heater, and a row of tall windows looking out at a bright winter morning. Sunlight reflected off the snow so strongly that everyone seemed lit from below, as if winter itself had come to listen. Graham Pike was already there. He wore a dark navy coat over a pale blue shirt, his scarf folded neatly beside a black tablet case. His hair was combed, his shoes polished despite the weather. He stood when Martha entered, and for the first time Caleb noticed something uneasy beneath the practiced manners. Maybe it had been there before. Maybe the question from Reverend Amos had put it there. Graham nodded. "Mr. and Mrs. Baines." Walter did not nod back. "Mr. Pike." The town mediator, a thin man named Caleb Mercer, with rimless glasses and a voice made for reading meeting minutes, called everyone to order. He explained that the purpose was review, not punishment, clarification, not accusation, documentation, not emotion. Nora, seated with 3 folders and 6 highlighters, whispered to Caleb, "Men who say not emotion are usually terrified of receipts." Caleb kept his face still. Bishop lay at his feet. Pip sat in a crate near the wall, deeply offended by confinement. Juniper sat beside Walter's chair, not in the crate, because she had made a sound in the hallway so mournful that Sam had declared it medically unbearable. Walter's hand rested near her head, not touching yet. Evelyn began. She did not dramatize the situation. She stated dates, account numbers, classifications, and assistance eligibility. She explained the seasonal hold rules and the request for a temporary halt. Her voice was calm, but every sentence had weight because each one landed exactly where it was supposed to. Nora followed with the fee timeline. She placed enlarged copies on the table. Not accusations, evidence, the wrong classification. The duplicate winter road charge, the paper statement fees applied after digital enrollment, the late penalties triggered by notices residents could not reasonably access. Other Pine Hollow residents had signed statements showing similar confusion. Graham listened, hands folded, expression controlled. When his turn came, he did what he had always done. He retreated into procedure. Pine Hollow Lots operates according to lease terms agreed upon by residents, he said. While I understand the hardship described, the company cannot waive balances simply because residents find technology inconvenient. Darla, seated in the back, made a face. Sam whispered, "Technology inconvenient. That's what I call my toaster." Harold Mercer glanced up. "Please," Graham continued. "That said, if a classification error occurred, it will need to be reviewed by corporate. I do not have unilateral authority to modify all charges today." Nora leaned forward. "But do you have authority to pause proceedings while corporate reviews an error your system created?" Graham's jaw tightened slightly. "I can recommend a temporary hold." "Recommend?" Nora repeated. Evelyn opened her planner. "County Social Services can submit a formal support letter today. The residents qualify for emergency heating assistance and likely food support. That reduces immediate household pressure. It does not resolve the fee dispute, but it prevents the situation from worsening while the review is pending." Walter stared at the table. His eyes were fixed on one enlarged copy of the misclassification page. Owner-occupied box left blank. Short-term rental box checked. A life changed by a square. Caleb saw the old man's hand curl slowly into a fist. Then Martha reached under the table and took it. Walter did not look at her, but his fingers opened. That was the moment the hearing changed for Caleb. Not because someone found new evidence, or because Graham cracked under pressure. It changed because Walter let Martha hold the hand that wanted to strike the table. He did not become less proud. He became less alone inside his pride. Harold Mercer cleared his throat. "Mr. Baines, is there anything you wish to add?" Walter's first instinct was visible. Refuse. Let the papers speak. Let Nora speak. Let Evelyn speak. Let anyone else walk through the humiliation. But Juniper shifted beside his chair, her head pressed lightly against his knee. Walter looked down at her. Then he looked at Graham. "I built rail brakes for years," Walter said. The room grew quiet. When brakes fail, people don't care which bolt started it. They care that the train didn't stop. He tapped the paper with one finger. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe a box. Maybe a computer. Maybe 10 people doing one small thing nobody thought mattered. But my wife and I were the train. Graham's eyes dropped. Walter's voice stayed rough but steady. "I'm not asking you to make me young. I'm not asking you to make us rich. I'm asking you to stop pushing while people figure out which bolt failed." No one spoke for a few seconds. Then, from the back, Reverend Amos Bell said quietly, "That seems like a modest request." Graham looked toward him. The Reverend sat with his large hands folded over his stomach, gray beard resting against his scarf. He had not come to preach. That made his presence heavier. "Mr. Pike," Amos said, "last week I asked you about your mother." Graham's face closed slightly. "I won't ask again," Amos continued. "But I will say this. Most people do not lose their homes in one grand disaster. They lose them through things nobody thought were personal enough to question." Graham said nothing. His fingers rested on the edge of his tablet case. Clean fingers. Controlled fingers. Caleb remembered Walter's hands on Juniper's tag, trembling over small metal. The comparison was not fair. It was also impossible not to see. At last, Graham exhaled. "I cannot erase the balance today," he said. Walter's shoulders stiffened. "But," Graham continued, "I will submit an immediate hold request and mark the account for internal review based on classification error. No removal action will proceed for 90 days, pending review." Martha covered her mouth. Nora uncapped a pen. "We'll need that in writing." Graham looked at her. Nora looked back. After a moment, Graham nodded. "You'll have it before I leave." Darla whispered, "Never fight a librarian with office supplies." Sam whispered, "I've seen her make a man apologize to a stapler." Harold Mercer recorded the agreement. Evelyn outlined next steps. Emergency heating assistance application that afternoon. Food support review by the end of the week. County letter attached to the Pine Hollow file. Copies mailed and emailed. Physical copies delivered to Walter and Martha. Nora added her own announcement before anyone could escape. "Beginning Thursday," she said, "the library will host free senior billing sessions. Bring notices, passwords, phones that hate you, and any relative who told you it was simple." A murmur moved through the room. Mrs. Keene, seated 2 rows back, began to cry quietly. Not loudly enough to interrupt anything, just enough for Darla to move beside her and press a napkin into her hand. The hearing ended without applause. That made it feel real. People stood slowly, gathering coats, folders, bags, pieces of courage. Graham remained at the table, writing the hold confirmation, while Nora stood over him with the peaceful expression of a hawk, watching a field mouse complete paperwork. Walter did not move for a while. Martha sat beside him, tears on her cheeks, not wiping them away. She looked at the signed paper in Evelyn's hand as if it were not a document, but a small candle. 90 days, she whispered. Walter nodded once. Not forever. No, Caleb said from behind them, but not today. Walter lowered his head. His hands rested on his knees, heavy and scarred. The hands of a man who had fixed engines, made tags from scrap metal, held too many bills, and nearly clenched themselves into fists when all he had needed was someone to read the fine print beside him. Juniper stood. She placed her front paws against Walter's leg, then pushed her head under his hand. In the quiet after the hearing, with Graham still typing and Nora still supervising, with Martha crying and Caleb watching from the edge of the room, Walter did not pull away. His fingers lowered into Juniper's fur. Awkwardly, stiffly, honestly. The puppy closed her eyes. Walter stared down at her for a long moment, then rubbed once behind her ear. "Don't get used to this," he muttered. Juniper leaned harder. Martha laughed through tears. Caleb felt Bishop shift beside him. The old shepherd looked up, and Caleb could almost read the judgment in his amber eyes. See? A house was not always saved by a victory. Sometimes it was saved by 90 days, a signature, a woman with a planner, a librarian with a highlighter, neighbors brave enough to bring their envelopes, and one small dog who knew exactly which lonely man needed weight against his knee. Outside Town Hall, the snow kept shining. Winter had not ended, but for Walter and Martha Baines, it had been told to wait. Winter did not leave White Pine Falls. It only changed its voice. After the hearing, the snow still fell. The roads still froze overnight and gleamed dangerously at dawn. The pines still carried white on their shoulders, like old priests bearing sacred robes. The wind still came down from the ridge with enough teeth to remind every living thing that mercy was not the same as warmth. But something had shifted. At the Baines place, the porch light worked again. It was not a grand light. No heavenly beam poured over Pine Hollow lots. It was only a small yellow bulb beneath a dented metal shade, repaired by Walter with wire, stubbornness, and language Martha later described as not fit for indoor theology. But when evening came, that bulb burned over the steps like a tiny oath. Beside the door, firewood stood stacked in careful rows. Not a mountain, not enough for a whole winter, but enough that Martha no longer counted every log before making tea. On the refrigerator, Nora had taped a payment calendar printed in large black letters with due dates circled and phone numbers written clearly underneath. Evelyn Price, County Social Services, Nora Voss, Library Billing Help. Sam Whitaker, dogs, but also opinions. Walter had crossed out that last part twice. Sam wrote it back in. The 90-day hold did not solve everything. It did not erase the balance, repair the roof, fill the pantry forever, or make Walter's knees younger. Pine Hollow management still had to complete its review. Corporate offices still spoke in delays. Forms still needed signatures. Some fees were frozen, some disputed, some still waiting under the word pending like wolves behind trees. But removal proceedings had stopped. For the first time in months, Walter and Martha could wake without wondering if a new envelope had come to take the ground beneath them. That was not salvation. It was breathing room. And sometimes, in winter, breathing room was a kingdom. Caleb came by 2 days after the hearing with Bishop and Pip in the truck. Pip arrived as if fired from a cannon. He bounded across the snow, slipped, recovered, then charged straight toward Martha, with the full-body joy of a creature who believed reunion should involve mild collision. "Oh, you little storm cloud," Martha laughed, catching him before he could take out her knees. Pip licked her chin, her scarf, and possibly part of her eyebrow. Juniper came out from the porch before Walter did. She had grown sturdier in the weeks since the store, her dark back sleek, her sage scarf tied neatly around her neck. She greeted Pip with a cautious wag, then walked past him and went straight to Bishop. The old shepherd lowered his head. Juniper touched her nose to his gray muzzle. No one had taught her that ritual. She had simply invented respect. Walter appeared behind her with a mug in one hand and a frown arranged for public use. "That thief chew anything important yet?" Caleb looked at Pip, who was now attempting to remove Martha's mitten. "Define important." "My glove still got teeth marks." That was a training exercise. "Training for burglary?" Pip barked once, proudly accepting the charge. Walter's mouth moved. "Not much. Enough." Martha saw it and said nothing. Caleb had learned that some smiles were like deer at the edge of the woods. Point at them too quickly, and they vanished. The new arrangement had not been decided in one dramatic conversation. It formed slowly, the way paths form in snow after enough careful crossings. Pip lived mostly with Caleb and Bishop at the cabin. He needed space, training, and enough movement to exhaust a creature whose soul seemed constructed from springs and crumbs. Caleb handled his food, veterinary bills, and exercises. Bishop handled discipline, which mostly consisted of looking disappointed until Pip reconsidered his choices. Juniper stayed mostly with Walter and Martha. No one officially declared that she had chosen them. There was no ceremony, no certificate, no speech. She simply stopped climbing into Caleb's truck at the end of visits. The first time it happened, Caleb opened the door and called softly. Juniper sat beside Walter's boot. Caleb waited. Walter said, "Well?" "She coming." Juniper leaned against Walter's leg. Walter looked down at her, then at Caleb. His face held the alarm of a man unexpectedly promoted. "She's your foster problem," Walter said. Caleb nodded. "Looks like she filed for reassignment." Walter grunted. "I never approved paperwork." Martha, standing behind him, smiled into her tea. That night, Caleb left Juniper at the Baines place with food, instructions from Sam, and a promise to cover whatever she needed. Walter listened to the instructions with exaggerated irritation and then repeated them back perfectly when Martha pretended to forget. 2 days later, Caleb found a small metal tag hanging beside Juniper's food bowl. It read, "Juniper Baines." The letters were uneven. The edges were smooth as river stones. Caleb picked it up and looked at Walter. Walter was pretending to fix the hinge on a cabinet that did not need fixing. "Spare metal," he muttered. "Of course." "Dog needed legal identification." "Very official." "Don't make that face." "What face?" "The face where you think you're quiet." Bishop, from his place near the heater, exhaled with the tired wisdom of an elder who had heard this argument before in many forms. From then on, the two homes began sharing more than dogs. On Thursdays, Nora held billing sessions at the library. At first, only 3 Pine Hollow residents came, then 7, then 12. They arrived with plastic bags full of envelopes, phones that refused to cooperate, passwords written on grocery receipts, and a collective belief that they were the only ones who did not understand. Nora destroyed that belief with a stapler, a printer, and ruthless compassion. "No," she would say, drawing a bright line across a notice. "You are not stupid. This is badly designed. There is a difference, and we will honor it loudly." Martha attended one afternoon with a basket of handmade dog scarves made from old sweaters. She had not planned to sell them. She had brought them because her hands liked to be useful while people talked. Darla bought the first one for a dog she did not own. "I'll find a dog later," Darla said. "This is an investment." By the end of the afternoon, every scarf was gone. Someone suggested Martha bring more next week. Martha blushed as if offered a crown. She did bring more, not many. 5, then 8, then 10. Each one stitched with quiet care. Red-brown, sage, navy, gray, one ridiculous yellow scarf Pip tried to steal and was declared unworthy of formal wear. The money was small. That was not the point. The point was that Martha began leaving the house with something to offer. Walter found his own way back into usefulness. Reverend Amos had an old snowmobile behind the church shed, a dead machine with grand ambitions and no spark. Walter saw it while dropping off Martha at the library and stopped mid-complaint. "That thing's been sitting wrong," he said. Amos looked at the snowmobile. "It has been sitting prayerfully. It's been rotting." Prayer and rot are sometimes neighbors. Walter spent 3 afternoons in the church shed with tools, coffee, and Juniper asleep near the door. He got the machine running by Friday. Amos paid him in split wood and a jar of peach preserves from a church pantry shelf that may or may not have belonged to a committee. Walter accepted the wood. He pretended to reject the preserves. Martha later found them hidden behind the oatmeal. Soon, residents began bringing Walter little things: a broken lamp switch, a bent mailbox hinge, a dog tag that needed replacing. He called the work useless. He also polished every metal edge until no finger could catch on it. Caleb saw the change in him most clearly on a Sunday evening. Dinner had not been planned. That was how it became tradition. The first Sunday, Martha insisted Caleb stay because she had made too much stew. Walter pointed out that she had not made too much stew until Caleb arrived. Martha said she was not taking culinary criticism from a man who believed black coffee counted as soup. The second Sunday, Walter set an extra bowl down without looking at anyone. The third Sunday, Pip stole Caleb's glove from beside the door and dragged it under Walter's chair. Juniper watched, deeply concerned about the collapse of civilization. Bishop lay beside the stove, breathing heavily, his eyes half closed, looking like an old judge who had found the court foolish but tolerable. Caleb sat at the table with steam rising from his bowl and realized he knew where the spoons were kept. It unsettled him. Then it warmed him. There were moments when Leah's ghost passed through his mind, not with pain sharp enough to cut, not any more. More like a blue bowl glimpsed on a shelf, a life he had not known how to hold. He wondered sometimes whether this was what she had meant when she said a house needed more than walls and locks. Pip bumped his head against Caleb's knee, begging for stew he had no legal right to possess. Caleb looked down. "No." Pip sat. "No." Pip slowly raised one paw. Walter snorted. "Dog negotiates better than Pine Hollow management." Martha laughed. Caleb did too, not loudly, not freely yet, but more easily than before. Later that night, after dinner, Walter stood on the porch with Caleb while the dogs moved in the yard below. Bishop walked slowly through the snow, his paw prints deep and deliberate. Pip bounded in wild loops, leaving a map no sane explorer could follow. Juniper stayed near the bottom step, keeping one eye on Walter and one eye on the forest. Walter leaned on the new section of railing Caleb had helped him replace. "Told Amos you're paying for both dogs' vet bills," he said. "I am." "Told him it's a temporary alliance." "Is that what we're calling it?" "Sounds better than charity." Caleb nodded. "Temporary alliance, then." Walter took a sip from his mug. "Military alliance." "You were a rail mechanic." "So?" Caleb looked at him. Walter shrugged. "A man can have allies." The words were small. They landed carefully. Caleb did not answer too fast. "Yes," he said. "He can." Walter kept watching the dogs. "You alone up there in that cabin?" Caleb's hand tightened once around his coffee mug. "Less than I was," he said. Walter nodded as if that were enough. And because it came from Walter, it was. The final heavy snowfall came overnight. No wind, no violence. Just a silent descent, thick and steady, covering the roofs, the road, the tool shed, the church bulletin board, the library lions, Caleb's truck, and every unfinished argument in White Pine Falls. By morning, the sky had cleared to a sharp blue. Caleb arrived just after sunrise with Bishop and Pip. The road had been plowed once, badly, which Walter described as a political gesture. The Baines porch light was still on, glowing pale in daylight. Smoke rose from the chimney pipe. Martha opened the door with a mug of tea in both hands and a scarf over her silver hair. "You're early," she said. "Pip voted for breakfast here." Pip ran past Caleb and into the yard before anyone could verify the election. Bishop descended from the truck slowly. Age had made each step a decision. Caleb stayed near, not helping unless needed. The old dog reached the snow, shook himself, and walked toward the porch with dignity, intact. Juniper came down the steps to meet him. Walter followed in his coat and navy hat, one hand resting on the railing he had sanded smooth the day before. He stood beside Martha, looking out over the yard. 3 sets of paw prints marked the fresh snow. Bishop's were deep, straight, and patient, crossing from the truck toward the porch like an old road still in use. Pip's were everywhere. Loops, skids, sudden turns, one mysterious circle around a stump, then a dramatic leap that ended in a face-first collapse into powder. Juniper's prints were smaller, steadier. They began at the porch, curved toward Bishop, then circled back around Walter's boots as if her world had learned its center. Caleb stood on the steps and took it in. The old manufactured home still leaned a little. The siding still needed work. The review was still pending. Money was still counted. Winter was still winter, but the porch light worked. The railing held. The dogs knew where to run. Martha carried tea for people who came through the door. Walter had begun fixing things for neighbors and pretending not to enjoy it. Nora's library sessions were full. Evelyn's number stayed by the phone. Darla dropped off bread nearing its sell-by date with an expression of criminal innocence. Sam continued to threaten Bishop with a diet, and Bishop continued to treat him as a personal disappointment. No villain had been dragged into the snow. No hidden inheritance had arrived. No miracle had dressed poverty in gold. Only this, an old house allowed to remain through winter, a town learning to read the fine print together, a lonely man finding a Sunday chair, and 3 dogs teaching everyone that love was not always a rescue. Sometimes love was a schedule, a scarf, a repaired railing, a name tag made from scrap metal, a 90-day hold, a warm bowl set out without asking. Juniper pressed her head against Walter's leg. He placed his scarred hand on her back and did not pretend it was accidental. Martha looked at him over her mug. Walter glanced at Caleb. "Don't say anything." Caleb lifted both hands. "Wasn't going to." "You were thinking loud." Pip burst from a snowdrift with Caleb's stolen glove in his mouth. Bishop watched him pass, too old to chase, too wise to bother, but not too old to wag his tail once. The sound of Martha's laughter rose into the cold morning. Small, bright, human. Caleb looked at the mobile home glowing between the pines and felt for the first time in years that a place did not need to be perfect to become a home. It only needed enough warmth for someone else to stand inside it. Winter stretched wide around them, ancient and white, but it no longer stood alone against them. And sometimes that was victory enough for one lifetime. Sometimes God does not send help as a thunderbolt from heaven. Sometimes He sends it as a neighbor with a shovel, a librarian with a highlighter, a warm bowl at the table, or an old dog who knows exactly where to rest his head. This story reminds us that a home is not saved by walls alone, but by the people willing to stand beside it when winter comes. And maybe the smallest mercies, a scarf, a repaired light, a few paw prints in the snow, are the miracles we overlook most often. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and consider subscribing for more stories of loyalty, hope, and quiet kindness. May God bring warmth to your home, peace to your heart, and someone faithful beside you when the road turns cold.